Welcome, everyone, to Doctoral Writing as a Nurse, the Problem of Interest. This is the second to last week of webinars that we have for this term. We have a couple coming up, but we're starting to get to the home stretch of the term. So if you have questions, please, I encourage you to ask them throughout. So today we're going to be talking about the problem of interest. The problem of interest is not just part of the doctoral project, it's also an assignment that's going to be due soon. And so we encourage people who are working on one or have looked ahead to ask questions. As I go through these, I'd like to ask those people who are in the room to contribute what your particular topic is. What sort of problem or issues are you seeing in your work that you want to research, that you want to address, that you want to try and make better or remediate in your workplace or in a workplace that you want to be in? That helps me customize the examples that I give you as we go through here, and also helps let me know what level of detail would best suit this audience. So just a couple of details. If you are new to the Writing Center, welcome, happy to have you. We work with students throughout the term in a variety of different ways. You can make appointments to work with us through WC Online, submit papers to get feedback, and a few things in between, like webinars like today. Speaking of webinars, we have 3 coming up. We have 2 on Wednesday, October 1st. I'm doing the live edit, watch how a professional editor reviews a dissertation webinar. And that's an opportunity to not only see a manuscript in progress, but see the process of a professional editor looking at it and saying, okay, this part doesn't make sense. It looks like they meant that. Here's how you'd want to say it to match what your committee's expectations are for this genre, things like that. So we are still looking for volunteers for that. So if you have a piece of a dissertation or a doctoral project manuscript that you'd like to submit, just go ahead and send me an email. I'll type my email address in the chat window. Just send me an email saying I'm interested and send us a draft before that webinar, and we'll see if we can work you in. We like to have a variety of manuscripts because that helps show the variety of ways of saying things, and also how to make these different things conform to the vision and the particular genre that is writing a Doctor of Nursing practice project or an EDD dissertation. Also coming up, my colleague Chelsea is teaching the Integrating Sources Without Plagiarizing webinar. That is going to be on Wednesday, right after the one that I'm teaching. So you can stay and do a twofer, or if you're dialed in for the call, just leave the phone on and don't hang up, and you can hear the second one as well. The last one that we have for the seminar, for this term, for the Fall 1 term, is writing about theoretical and conceptual frameworks. And I strongly recommend that you see this one, whether you are working on your dissertation right now, or whether you are thinking, okay, that's a comfortable 1.5 or 2 years away, because you want to get started now on how a theoretical or conceptual framework informs your research. A lot of students will try and kind of bolt it on afterwards, and that works about as well as if you go to the car dealer and you purchase let's say a Ford Focus. Then you say, you know what? I need to be hauling construction stuff around. I need to turn this Ford Focus into a truck. Now, it's not that you can't do it. You can get a trailer, you can put on a roof rack and things like that, but it works out easier if you set out to go buy a truck in the first place for doing the job of a truck. What a theoretical or conceptual framework does, and this does connect back to our problem of interest, what a theoretical or conceptual framework does is it shapes how you look at things and what you look at, what you pay attention to, what you value. You might think about it as if we're going to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which states that food and shelter must be provided before people care about other things. So if you are stranded on a desert island, and I show up and I present you a cake, and I say, look, isn't this cake beautiful? Look at all this icing on it. You are probably going to be thinking more, I'm going to eat this cake right now. I like food, rather than paying attention to those other details. And so picking your theoretical or conceptual framework early in the process allows you to say, oh, these are the kinds of things that I should be looking for as I do my lit review. This is what I should be thinking about as I formulate my questions. So more on that on next week. You can see recordings of all of our past webinars on the Writing Center website, including if there's one that you missed and you had to duck out early, you should be able to see it. And if there's something that you know we've offered in the past, but we're not offering this term or not at the time that works for you, just scroll down and you can find all those. So we record all of our webinars, and I strongly encourage looking at that. We have some people who will watch some of our webinars as they prepare to submit an assignment because it helps remind them of certain rules or guidelines they want to follow, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, let's move to the main content of our webinar today. So this webinar is focused on the problem of interest, and so we are going to focus on two learning objectives: developing an understanding of the POI assignment and its purpose, and we're going to create a framework for completing this assignment. And just to clarify, this isn't framework in the sense of theoretical or conceptual framework. This is more as in an action plan and assembling the skeleton of what you're doing. So here are the components today. And if you are joining us online and can see that, great. You can download any of these by typing in the links. You can also, if you are joining us by phone, I'll tell you that the three things that we have here are the APA course paper template, which I hope you're all using for your assignments. It does most of the formatting for you. A link to the Nursing 701 POI assignment, and a link to the Nursing 752 practice problem assignment. Now, these are particular assignments that I'll be showing you in just a moment. And also, in case you want to see where any of these things end up ultimately, you can look at sample ACU theses and dissertations that have been approved by the program, the students graduated, see, oh, yeah, it is that simple. A lot of people think that these are very difficult to write. I'd say not if you keep in mind what the genre expectations are. If you understand what you're being asked to write, you can write that much quicker and with less trouble than if you think, oh, I need a 5-page paper, and actually we just want one really good paragraph. So here's our basic process that we're going to do. We're going to look at a rubric for an assignment. I'd like to ask you to think about a draft Pico question that you might be asking in your study, and then we're going to build an outline. Now, Pico, if you're not familiar with this, or if you feel you could benefit from a little brush up, Pico is an acronym that stands for population or patient. You know, who is it that you're looking at, and what do they have, or how did you select these people? I is intervention or indicator. You know, this is the variable of interest that we're trying to look at. Were they exposed to a disease? Are they prone to risky behavior? What's the factor that has us looking at them and that we're trying to affect? C is our comparison or control. Most studies will have this, not all, but you want to have some basis of comparison. And I think it would be fair to say that when there is not a C, it's more in the sense of there's not an active control group that you have recruited. Often if you are doing an intervention study, you won't tell people, I'm sorry, you can't participate in this. We need to see if it works first. Usually there'll be some sort of retrospective data that you end up comparing against, rather than recruiting some people and saying, sorry, you can't participate. Get out of our sandbox, which would be cruel. O is the outcome. What are you trying to make happen at the other end? Are you trying to reduce the risk of disease, improve the accuracy of diagnosis, reduce the frequency at which something happens? And then T is the amount of time that it takes for this intervention to work. Now, how are you going to test this? Now, you may be familiar with Pico as Pico without the time, and that's because before you do a literature search, you won't know just how long is reasonable to test. The literature search will tell you, what have other people done? Did those have decent results? Were they able to draw conclusions or generalize this or replicate that later? And if you set that arbitrarily and early, you will probably shoot your study in the foot, so to speak. So you want to set the first 4 first, and then the time will come as you do your literature search. All right, I am going to now go ahead and switch over from what you see on these slides here to actually opening up one of these assignments. So there'll be a little bit of back and forth as we go between different windows. So if you hear me talking about something and you say, well, I can't see that, give it a moment, but if you still don't see it, do let me know. So at this point, you should be about to see the screen shift from showing the slides to showing a view of Canvas. You should now be able to see the POI for clinical inquiry assignment. Now, this assignment, it states that you want to, in 5 to 7 pages, describe your problem of interest in particular sections. The background of POI, purpose of project, significance of the problem of interest, and the nature of the project. This will become the foundation of Chapter 1. And if you do it right, there'll be relatively small alterations to put this material into Chapter 1. Among other things, your final Chapter 1 will have specific research questions that you'll be asking. And there'll be a couple things that are a little bit more formalized in here, but this is mostly material that's designed exactly to fulfill the functions of sections you need to have in Chapter 1. So I'm going to also go ahead and download and open this outline of the DNP project to show you how this fits together. Give it a moment for that new share to take effect. Still loading. Okay, you should now be seeing my screen in Microsoft Word. You'll see that it gives us a basic breakdown of what's going on there. You can look ahead at the other things if you want, but we're going to focus on Chapter 1. Well, you see that there is an introduction where you identify the problem, give the background, state the purpose of what you're doing, and describe the significance of the problem in brief. To describe the nature of your project, which is to say, how are you going to go do this? What are you going to do exactly? The research question that you're trying to answer. The hypothesis, which is you're basically saying, okay, if we prove this, then it didn't work. If we prove that or don't disprove that, then that suggests this thing might be the answer. Then the theoretical conceptual framework with a diagram. Operational definitions, that's key terms that you might be using in the study that you wouldn't just get in a dictionary. And the scope of the project, okay, how long is that going to be? All right, so that's what the final chapter is going to look at like. So let's turn back to that assignment. We'll see that there's actually a fair bit of overlap here. So we have here, all right, must have the background of the POI. Okay, well, we got that from the outline. There is purpose of the project. Okay, got that. Significance. Yep, the nature, what we intend to do. So you see all of these correspond with sections that are going to be in chapter 1. So we want to make sure that any work that you do here is work that you can reuse. So rather than just brush through this, let's make sure we have citations that are current, usually meaning in the last 5 years if that's available, that we have it well organized, and that this is something that we actually would like and want to do, that we feel is important. So let's go ahead and look at this rubric at the bottom here. So we see here that it says you must have a cover page. Sure, easy enough. Includes the stated problem or population of interest. Okay. Describes this in detail, gives the background and purpose, explains the nature of the project. All right, that seems a pretty straightforward list. All right, now here's a spoiler. The other assignment is basically looking at the instructions for how you write this up as a chapter. So I'll say, for now, let's just leave that in the background. You can look at it, but we've seen from looking at the outline, we know where this is headed. So let's look at those instructions. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my slides here. You see, okay, so we have those 4 sections we need to have. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab a copy of the APA course paper template. Just going to download that from the link that we have. And I am going to go ahead and open that in Microsoft Word. And I am going to start by copy and pasting the instructions here into that template, so I have them right in front of me as I go. All right, I'm going to exit out of PowerPoint here. And you should now see my document in Word. You can fill in these placeholders later. We're going straight to the content here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and grab all this stuff and remove this placeholder stuff. And we have these instructions here. Okay, so when it says background of POI, that tells me, oh, we need a section that's called background. And that's because that's a major section. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply the AP Level 1 style here and make that an AP Level 1 heading because that's a major section. Purpose of project, okay, let's make that another Level 1 section. Significance and nature of project. All right, so we know that there are going to be 4 major sections here. Can go ahead and remove that now. So, well, how long are these going to be? Well, they gave us 5 to 7 pages worth, which means that each of these sections on average is going to be somewhere between 1 and 2 pages long, which isn't a lot. We're talking 3 to 6 paragraphs, really, and most of these will be in the middle. So looking at the list in the chapter 1 thing, I'm just going to copy and paste this into this window so you can see it. Pressing that up top. We see that it's going to have a bunch of sections that match up pretty well. We have, okay, identify the problem, give us background, purpose of project, significance, nature project, and then some other things like the research question. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with a problem that one of my students worked on earlier. So all the citations that you see will be made up, but this is a real problem that they identified in the workplace. And so we are going to see what we can do to put up together an outline for this. All right, so first note is to say, okay, what are we talking about? So our general topic, for the sake of this webinar, is going to be bacterial contamination in the emergency room environment. Okay, that's very general. We should probably make that more specific. So we're going to do this to improving hand washing compliance to reduce bacterial contamination in the emergency room environment. Now, that's not describing a problem. That's more stating a goal of improving things. So make sure that when you're describing an issue that you're addressing, that you mention something and tell the reader that it is a problem. So if we had something to the effect of, post-surgical infections resulting, post-surgical patient infections resulting from poor emergency hygiene cost hospitals billion per year. So what we've done here is we've described a situation, okay, post-surgical patient infections that result from this cost hospitals this amount in a geographic context in the United States. This cost is problematic to who? Now, when you're just plotting this out, you know you can always look up some details later. So if you're on a roll for getting the ideas out, just put in some placeholders like that. And make sure that you go back and actually fill them in sometime other than right before, because then you end up submitting a draft that's missing key supporting citations and things like that, which you should always have when you are making factual claims. Now that's a general problem. Now, sometimes you're describing a problem that you have seen on the job. So you can describe that, to buttress this. Besides these facts, I have seen this at the study site, at the project site. So if you're going to do that, yes, you can use I statements and have something like, in my 15 years as a nurse, I have observed this problem at blah. So now, how do we state in brief the problem of interest? That's saying, what within the general problem are you going to focus on? The problem of interest for this doctoral project is the lack of hand washing compliance causes bacterial contamination and contributes to post-surgery Okay, so you don't need to get all the details in first, but you want to center yourself and start thinking, okay, what's the general situation. How does that connect to what I'm doing or the things that I'm concerned about? What supporting evidence do you have that this is an issue? And if it's a project site, unless you've been lucky or unlucky enough to have someone publishing an article about your site already, that's probably going to be in some measure, you have observed this, or you've been asked to do this, or someone has told you this is an issue, leading to this specific thing of saying, okay, so here's the problem that I'm interested in trying to address. The problem of interest for this doctoral project is the lack of hand washing compliance of the project site, which causes bacterial contamination in the emergency room environment and contributes to post-surgical infections and attendant increases in costs of care. Now, I do recommend reading the text out loud because you just saw me notice, oh, there's a word there that's missing and put it in. And I am not the only person who does that. All the time when I have students meet with me, I ask them to read the text out loud and they say, oh, I'm missing a word and put it in. So it's a good proofreading strategy and helps you make it more specific. Because if you think it sounds vague when you read it out loud, that probably means that someone will think it's vague when they hear it. And so that prompts you to put in extra details like that to be more clear about what we're talking about. So let's look at how we would fill out this outline here. Now, in this case, we're actually going to just go ahead and create a numbered outline for this section. Background. Well, what's the scope of this problem? We'll say scope of the problem in general. So that's starting out, okay, let's zero in. Let's go from general to more specific, leading to. Now, each of these things could be one sentence or they could be more. It kind of depends on what the issue is and how much explanation do you have, how well is it documented, and so forth. But you can see that this is following that progression of general to more specific. Then let's look at, are there any other correlating factors that are supposed to be involved? For example, we have a number of students in the program who are working on projects related to the Healthy 2020 initiative, which is this big nationwide initiative. And as you know, 2020 is just around the corner. So if they're working on something to tie in that, then that would be an important background to do, especially if you're getting funding to do this, or the hospital has promised that they're going to meet certain metrics, and this is designed to try and help them do that. So we're going to go from general to more specific. Once we get to that, then we can see, okay, well, if we are doing this, then we actually have a little hierarchy here. So you can start sorting this outline as you see me doing and saying, okay, so if the purpose of this is to get us to talking about the study site, this paragraph is really the background of the issue. Let's introduce something about the scope. And let's also answer this question, who cares about this issue? While it's true that many things are problematic for a lot of people, if you're, say, a hospital administrator who's trying to keep costs down and stop your malpractice insurance and everything from going through the roof, you're looking at the bottom line in a different way than if you are, on the floor, as you say, on the floor, and you're looking at it from more of a personnel management thing, rather than my telling other people to do this. I'm trying to improve people's routines so that they do the hand washing that they're supposed to do. So this leads to, okay, so why is this why or how is this an issue at the project site? How do you know this? It could be an email from an administrator. It could be something you have seen. It could be many things, but the point is to give the reader the details here so they know, oh, yes, that does sound like it's a project at that time and place. So the purpose of the project, this is also going to be an outline section. Okay, well, what are you trying to do? What is the outcome that you want? Now, we're going to go a little bit general with that because I'm going to come back in just a moment after we talk about significance. Let's start out with significance with why is this important to address? How will addressing this with your project allow the, we'll say the remediation, allow, facilitate, enable. Let's look back at what we have here for purpose. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so you can see more of this text on the screen. So what is the purpose of the project? What outcome are you trying to create? Now, think small picture here, because the small picture is what are you trying to discover or change directly through this project? Like, if I was going about this saying, I'm going to try and find out why our existing procedures aren't going to be followed, that's a very different outcome than if I'm trying to change those things for the project. Now, you could have a project that tries to do both. That's fine, but that will take more time and more work. So just keep that in mind. What exactly is your goal or your key goals here? And there may be things where there's going to be a follow-up where other people will work on it, or you will work on it later. But for right now, you're doing a smaller subset. So significance, why is this important to address? What support do you have in the literature for this? What doesn't the literature provide, cover, document? Who will use the results? Now, how will addressing this with your project allow, facilitate, or enable the remediation? This is where people sometimes go a little bit overboard and they say, oh, this will solve it. Well, a lot of problems persist for a while, and I'd steer you away from having any text that says that you'll solve the problem entirely. Help address, try and remediate, sure. But if you're trying to change things at one project site, you can see, all right, is this something that can be generalizable to somewhere else? Great, if it can be. But you don't need to solve everything in one project. You have a whole career to work on those things. So the nature of the project, once you've clarified these other things, you've also gotten a lot of these details out of the way. So now you can focus on what exactly are you going to do? So I'm going to start by saying, okay, this project is a two-phase project. My project is going to be an observation phase followed by an intervention phase. We look at what people are doing, and then we try to do something to try to get them to change. Now, there are a couple different ways you could do it. You could have a pilot study before you do a broader one. You could have preliminary interviews that you use to check conditions against what you're finding in the literature review. But the short version is you want to outline the project. Who are the participants? what is the population that they're going to be drawn from? How will you interact or collect data from them? What tools are you going to be using? Now, tools is a very general thing here. Tools can refer to things like, are you using a survey instrument to collect data? Are you doing interviews? Are you doing observations with note-taking? And from that, what sorts of analysis will you be doing? Now, some of this will be shaped by your final research questions, but we're describing, okay, so what is your project? And that includes not only collecting data, but having some idea of what you're going to do with that and how you'll be looking at it. So as an example, you could collect data by standing there next to a sink and making a mark on your clipboard each time someone washed their hands. Now, there's a design and flaw that can creep in with there, where if you have a supervisor standing there with a clipboard, people are probably going to wash their hands more while that supervisor is there. Will they do the same thing when you're not? I would guess that the presence would probably bias the results. So one of the reasons we're having you write about that and think about that now is that kind of consideration, if it's identified by your professor or they give you feedback on this, that could be something that tells you, oh, we should see if there's a different way that we can come up with or that's been used in the literature that we can replicate that doesn't have this issue. So something to think about. Now, for what sorts of analysis you will be doing, actually, no, I want to say a little bit about that. Sometimes there is a technical solution, like you can have a infrared counter. Some of those battery-powered sinks will actually spit out figures on how much they're used, and you can see without having to be in the room how many times people have washed their hands versus how often you expect them to based on the routine for that particular procedure, say. So there are non-invasive ways where you might collect the same data where it's just a simple design tweak rather than having to change the goal of collecting that data, for example. Now, what sorts of analysis is going to depend a lot on what are you trying to do on the other end? And that what are you going to try and do on the other end helps inform what specific research questions you are planning to ask. Now, you'll see that research questions are not on this outline. They are on the chapter outline for the chapter you will eventually expand this into, but they're not required here. But it's good to think about, well, what kinds of things are you hoping to learn? For the study that my student did, their goal was to first find out what wasn't happening so that they could not just use anecdotal information, but have some quantitative data there. And so they did a quick observation thing using cameras that were already installed. So they didn't have to be in the room, and they just looked at things and counted stuff. And then they had a couple interviews one-on-one with people and asked, so I noticed this thing, what was going on? And it turned out that when people felt that they were really busy and rushed and shorthanded, that they skipped a couple steps. And we know in nursing that skipping steps is bad. If you miss something like the instrument count, that can not only have health implications for the patient, but also financial implications for the hospital. So it's the kind of detail you want to be really paying attention to. So in that case, what they ultimately did was they created a way of dividing the process so that there's a simple tally on the board that showed that things had been done, and they would mark it off. And then they tried that in their project study and found that that simple intervention had significant results. Now, I am not expecting you to know your full thing now and have all those details set up, but we want you to be thinking about it because over the course of your later courses, you will fill in more of these details and have an increasingly more specific idea as we go along. Okay, at this point, we are going to switch back to those slides and do a little bit of a recap before we conclude. Been a good audience today, but if you have any questions that I haven't answered so far, please do let me know. All right, so going back to our learning objectives here. So we've talked about what the problem of interest assignment is in a general sense and what the specific requirements are. We've also talked about and walked through the process of creating a framework, a working outline for completing this assignment. So going back to those instructions here. All right, 5 to 7 pages describing it. We cover the background, the purpose of the project, the significance of the POI, and the nature of project. There should ideally be very little overlap in the sense of you don't want to be repeating the same things. You can go into more detail or less detail in different sections, but you don't want to have sentences that basically repeat the same thing. And using the detailed outline that we built helps you stay on task and know, okay, I have actually covered that in another section. So from this general outline, you can go ahead and add more details down to writing out key points and including parenthetical citations in there until this becomes a map where you know more or less sentence by sentence what you're going to be writing in each paragraph. We know that 5 to 7 pages, that again, these sections are going to be 1 to 2 pages each. And probably this first background section will be a little shorter, maybe around a page. Purpose of project is probably going to be 1 to 2. Significance, depending on how much you have to pack, could be larger. And nature project, we know, okay, 1 to 2 pages. If it's a very general population, and that's fine. And if it's a more specific population, you'll probably have a couple notes on, okay, why these particular people, or how will you reach these people? And just give us the details that you have. And if you work on this, you can even bring your outline in to either meet with your professor during office hours or come to the writing center and ask, does this look like I covered all the main bases? Have I addressed all the issues? All right, we are going to conclude our webinar on that point. So thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing